Hello, 422. Hope all is going well. It's Dr. Allen. Just going to give you a heads up. Actually, if you have me for 380, you've probably already heard the speech. I'm recording these speeches at the same time. Not at the exact same time, but during the same day. And I'm at home recording these, and it looks like my cursor has been having a little bit of problems with my Mac. So in case you see me fiddling around, that might be it. Or if you see me clicking, that's probably why. This week, we're going to actually delve into world history a little bit and look at some approaches with that. Before we get going, I just wanted to give you a big shout out. I read the discussion boards this week. The stuff on the 1619 project, your stuff that you put on there on the forums were fantastic. I think everyone was kind of hitting what I wanted you to get out of it. Obviously, it's in the news a lot, and a couple of people actually made the point it's tricky right now because it's so political, but you also can't be, as a social studies teacher, you can't be scared to teach things like that. I mean, or controversial things. That's part of the territory. One person actually said, I don't even know if I would use the word 1619. I might use some of the materials and just go with it. I have a feeling that might be a really good approach in some regards, because if you're not using the key term, a lot of people probably would be, wow, this is awesome, or things. I think also another thing a lot of people said, and I was a big proponent of this. I can't say that I ever used 100% of any lesson that I saw or used or took aspects from. And I guess that last term is what I would kind of want you to get. I usually just took parts out of lessons. I might not, like if I found something on the internet, all teachers do that. You look for ideas. I don't know if I used everything word for word, but there might be something in there and I pulled it out. And I think that's the important thing that you want to do. And also a couple of people really made an excellent point. It's just bringing in other aspects, other cultures into, or other ideas into your lessons. You just don't want to make it, it was the discussion board that I actually sacrificed for the 1619, but you don't want to make everything just hero history. And that's something live. Sometimes we seem to kind of go down that rabbit hole. Just one of those things because we have a little longer time sometimes in our evening classes. But hero history is basically the concept that lessons are formed around certain individuals and they're kind of held up to here. And by the way, I find these people very interesting. I have a lot of stuff on them, but it would be your Washingtons, your Lincolns, stuff like that. And it's not that common. People other than that, we just kind of focus on presidents, if you think about it, where each era, like there's the Washingtonian era, there's the Lincoln era, there's the Jeffersonian, the Jacksonian, World War One. We're going to talk about with U.S. history, but you can just go right down the line. What I'm basically saying is discussion boards were great. Someone in our department, Dr. Burke, actually just forwarded me something on the 1619 project, and actually National Council of Social Studies actually just put some more stuff out. So I may forward that to you, and you're welcome to check it out or not. I just felt like I would be doing you a disservice if we didn't at least address it a little bit or talk about it in the class, since it's in the news so much, and you're getting ready to go out in the field this next semester or the following semester. It might be something that you have to talk about and see. So anyway, that's the 1619 project. The other thing, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Sorry, I have a squeaky chair also, if you hear that. That's not yet. That's for a little later. That is not what I want. All right. About half of you have filled this out. I'm just going to go ahead and set the time up since it's been a week, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page, and I will send out a Zoom link with this. I would like to get together face-to-face. I know it's scary for all of us. Not really. You all seem like you're an awesome bunch. But I sent out a survey, and I'm trying to find my little plan book here, about what might be the best time to get together. It could be as long or as short as you all want to make it. But I want to make sure everyone's on the same page with the unit plans. That's a big one. And also, we're going to start doing a little more assignments, because now we're going to start getting into content-specific stuff. Like World History today, you have an assignment. I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable in doing what they're doing. I will say this, I was raving about you all to someone the other day. All my classes, actually. The work you all have been doing is great. I feel like everyone's getting what they need to get out of the class, but it's always better to actually hear it or if I'm misreading anything, I would rather hear it now than as, we're still in September. So as you can look there, I sent out a Google form, and it looked like we had some responses. It looked like everyone wanted to get together on October the 1st, which is awesome. Let me look. I was looking at my days here. That would be October the 1st. So from 11 to 12, I will send out a Zoom link and we will get together. And basically, it's going to be kind of informal. I just want to make sure everyone's safe and comfortable with their unit plans. The world history assignment that I'm going to talk about today, if you all want to talk about it, and just anything in general, if you all want to talk about and be on the same page, and any questions or follow-ups or anything like that. Plus, it'd be nice to actually meet you all. I think everyone in this class, I am actually their advisor. I was going through my new advisee list just the other day, and some of you have reached out, but I think some of you had Dr. Cole before. Her advisees have actually moved over to me. So that's another reason why I thought we'd meet face-to-face again. So when we do advising. So I'm babbling a little bit, but anyway, I will send out a Zoom link for October 1st. I'm looking forward to it. We'll get together. I'll be in there a little early if you have any questions you want to ask me, just without the group or anything like that. And I blocked an hour, but if you all want to talk for a half an hour, that's fine. If you want to talk for 15 minutes, that's fine. If you want to talk for 2 hours, that's fine. It's all good. It's a unique situation, a unique semester. So I just want to make sure we're good. That, I think, is one more thing. As always, the reviews on the materials are always good. The resources. I know I'm not expecting you all to use all those resources in your life, but I think it's important to share them. And if you my goal always is if you just take 1 or 2 of those resources out and potentially use them in the future, it's a win. So hopefully by the time we're at the end of the semester, you'll be able to use some of these things. And I guess I'm babbling now, so I think we should go ahead and start the lesson. Let's go ahead and go to the week. That'll be moved up, of course, as always, before the end. This week, now we're getting into, I feel like, more fun stuff, but we're going to be getting into world history teaching. World history, actually, sorry, I'm digging out my notes. World history is actually my favorite thing that I taught ever. I taught middle school most of the time. I did a little bit of world history in high school. I actually did some of even the community college, local community college. I did a little bit of the high school in the classroom type world history. And, it's just always been one of the things that I've liked, found interesting. I've done did West Virginia history, which was fun. Did U.S. history, which is also fun. But world, I always thought, like, when I taught middle school, especially in West Virginia, it's the first time usually students are getting anything other than U.S. history. So they're kind of into it a little more. If you're from Maryland, which I believe we have a person or two that's from the Boonesboro, Washington County area, yours would be 6th grade. They kind of hit the ancient history and things like that in the 6th grade, and in West Virginia, it's 7th grade. Like I said, they have some interest. Now, when you get to high school, obviously you might hit this a little more because 9th grade is world history in West Virginia, but you could do AP world history. And even though it's Western civilization, you could do AP Europe also. I believe in 10th grade a lot of times is AP Europe. So give or take. But anyway, that's kind of the long and short of it. So why don't we go ahead and get going. We're going to do world history. Relates to chapter 9 in your Zeven book. This week, there's a little bit due this week. The quizzes I usually leave open. So if you're really on a time crunch, don't freak out. It'll be open and you can finish it a little after. And also, I try to be a little flexible. I know with online stuff, sometimes you might get an info dump or assignment dump. If you're running a day or two behind, that is no big deal. It's not, I usually try to grade everything by Thursday or Friday, or at least, before the following week, but it's not throwing me off because I'm not, as soon as they're submitted, I don't grade them immediately. So what I'm saying is if you think you're running a day or two behind, just fire me an email. It's not a big deal. But you have quiz 2, blog 5, which I'll talk about with the resources. Actually, I'm going to add a couple on there before we get going too. I think there's 2 that I ran into in the last week or so that I wanted to share with you. You do have an assignment. I'll talk about that at the end. It's the world history inquiry-based assignment. There's the quiz too. And of course, you have your flip grid reaction, which if you go to the flip grid reaction, maybe we'll get there. I'll show you. We're going to talk a little bit about. Dun, 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 dun. I do want to clarify this just a little bit. It says, which organizational approach, which we're going to talk about, do you see yourself using? You can use more than one. And again, we'll go over these here in a few minutes. You're also going to have to defend your choice. Also, and this is going to be a little quirky, and this is where not being live and face to face, it could be. Don't overthink it, is what I'm saying. But in terms of assessment, what type of assessment do you think you'll use in a world history class? A formative and a summative. The reason why I'm pulling this up here, I don't want you to say, I'll give a test. That I want you to think outside the box on that a little bit. I'm not saying you won't give tests. You will. I did it for years. You take them now. They're just part of life. But I want you to think of some summative, especially assignments that you might do in world history that aren't just test-based. And if you need a little, I put some examples and such up for formative and summative assessments in world history if you need them. So, but with all that being said, oh, there you go. Boom. I knew I did. So, all right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into the nuts and bolts of everything, and I'll come back and revisit what you need to do. If you look here, I have some resources and some other things that I've done in world history. I'll come back and just show them to you here in a minute. But before we do anything, I want to rehash or talk a little bit about teaching world history and how to actually do it in the middle school or in high school. Now, Zeven kind of gets into this a little bit about different ways to do this. There's organization and then there's instruction, or at least approaches to instruction. Let me just talk a little bit about each, and then we'll kind of go with it. And I think you'll find that the U.S. history is very similar to this. He talks about there being 3 forms of instruction that you can do for world history. You can do a thematic type lesson, which I have to say, as I got more and more, I guess, experience in the classroom, I started to do this a little more. And one thing I want to say, and I'll probably jump back to where I was, I kind of incorporated all aspects of these. I can't say that I just came in and firmly said, I am a thematic person or I am a regional person. It's a long year and you may pull bits and pieces out. That's just like what we were talking about with the 1619 project. There are things in there that you definitely may pull out and use. Let me jump back. But okay, there's 3 forms of organization. And what I'm talking about is there's thematic. So you could theoretically teach world history and organize your curriculum in world history under different themes. That would be things like revolutions. Think about it. If you had just a broad topic of revolutions and you were thinking about things you could teach in world history, you could do French Revolution, American Revolution. Well, where American might not fall in the world, but the influence, the French Revolution, Industrial Revolution. You have all these revolutions. If you've had modern Europe, the Age of Revolutions, you had the Belgian Revolution, Greek Revolution, French Revolution, 1848. Modern revolutions, you could talk about Cuba and the things that went on down there before the Bay of Pigs and things like that. You can get into tons of stuff. It doesn't even have to have the word revolutions in it. It's anyone that's rebelling against some group. You could go clear up into the 80s. It happens today. So you could talk about different revolutions. You could talk about technology changes. And this is where me recording, this is one of the weaknesses with this. Usually in the class, people start firing stuff off faster than I can think of them. But for example, you could go way back. You could go back to technology changes. I'm talking like being able to write. And then you can get into farming changes. And then you can get into, iron changing from wooden ships. And then you can get into World War I. I mean, you can get into that. Flight, all that. What I'm getting is you can definitely do things under a thematic approach. And a lot of teachers actually like to do this. Again, I don't think when you first go out into the field, sometimes it leads itself to doing this, because normally when you get out at first, you're I don't want to say your head's spinning, but you're just trying to get organized and get settled. And what that leads to is I think what most of us do, especially in U.S. history, but not world all the time. But it's chronology or a time-based type thing. You build it around time. If you think about it, you can do ancient, medieval, colonial, modern. You kind of do it in that phase. One thing I will say about this, and I guess I'm just going to let me jump down to place too. I think sometimes place and time-based type things kind of overlap. Sometimes we do units based around a location, like what's going on in India at the time, or what's going on in Europe, or what's going on in Africa, the Americas. I think that's another one that's very popular. But if we were just thinking about time-based things, the one thing I would make sure that your students understand, and this is where your timelines are very important. We were talking a week or two ago about using timelines. I don't think students always relate dates with multiple places. For example, if we were talking about 50 BC and what's going on in Rome, I think sometimes students just get locked into 50 BC being associated with Rome, if this makes sense. And there's stuff going on in China at that same time. There's stuff going on in India. There's stuff going on in North America. That's where sometimes your timelines and going back and just kind of molding things. This is another thing I'd like to ask a lot of times, and I didn't put it on the discussion board or anything, but some people are dates people, some people are not. Personally, I was not a huge date person, but if it was an important date, I would note it. Of course, in U.S. history, there, it'd be like 1776. If I was teaching something that was a little more Western civilization based, 1066 is a big one. 1492, obviously a big one. So, but these are your three things: chronology, theme, place. Sorry, chronology. I always butchered that the one time, but theme, chronology, and place. Those are your three ways to set things up. Place is something I actually use that a decent amount in middle school, because sometimes the standards have changed a little bit, but they used to kind of have a geography type spin to them also. So a lot of times we would look at Europe and we would talk about, some of the geography in Europe, like I'm holding Europe. And then we would get into a little bit of, the history and such. Then we would move over to maybe doing Asia or Far East Asia, and we would get into aspects like that. But that's going back into that time-based thing. I also had to go back and revisit, like, don't forget, when this is going on in China, this is also going on in Europe. But anyway, whatever you pick is fine. My gut tells me this is where most of the time we fall into. It's a default. If you want to really get nuts, and I know it's actually mentioned a little more in the US section, but just in case I would happen to forget to mention, some people actually have started teaching backwards. And what I mean by that, think about we're in 2020 right now. Let's just use pandemics. That's an easy one. You could go, you have what's going on now. Maybe you're going to go back and talk about, okay, this is a pretty important event that's going on right now. We got COVID, pandemics, which could be a theme in and of itself also. You might go back and do something on the Spanish flu. Actually, I just read an article on a huge flu that happened in 1968. It killed over 1 million people. You could do, I don't know if swine flu would fall into that, but well, it could, but it's not as major as what's going on now. Yes, the Spanish flu. Maybe you'll go back and talk about tuberculosis. Maybe you'll go back a little farther and talk about the plague or the Black Death. You could go back and link all these things. Or maybe something else that might be going on. If you're talking about the Middle East, maybe you can talk about some of the things that kind of why what's going on in the Middle East is rooted in things. So if you're talking about Syria or Lebanon or Israel, you can go back and you can say, well, let's just do Israel, because I can do that right off the top of my head. If you have Israel was founded right after World War II. Why did it get into that? Then you would get into, British colonization and things like that. You could also even go back further and like the treatment of Jewish people through time and such. So you can go back and trace, and it's not a bad way to do it in chronology. And I think a lot of times it works because students can make more modern connections and see why it's important. But with all that being said, these are your three important or three major forms of organization: theme, chronology, and place. Now, Approaches to instructional planning. There's a lot. I have the notes up here. I'm not going to read those word for word. I'm just going to kind of give you the nuts and bolts, and you can definitely read it. This is posted. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach things. Western history approach is one. Stresses European and Western history and curriculum. I said I wasn't going to read it. I'm still reading that first line, but it focuses on European history and what we would call the Western world. That, by and large, by the way, usually is Europe and the United States and Canada and places, I guess, that have been influenced from the British Empire, even in some regard, like Australia, even though it's not the West. It's one of those approaches where I think it was pretty much the standard approach for a long time. Just to give you a connection, since you're all taking history classes, I was a former history major at Shepherd in the early 90s. And we didn't take world history, we took Western Civ. When I teach, I'm not going to kid you, I'm probably more rooted in European history than I am anything else. It was just the way I was taught in the classes that I took. I think we still kind of gear ourselves to that just because in the United States, a lot of our history still has those European connections. I think we are trying to expand now, and I think you all did a nice job explaining the importance of that on the discussion board. But it is definitely a Western approach. If you just, I mean, I'm going to run right through it. Think about it. You go Mesopotamian, then usually you go Greeks, then you go Romans, then you go, we'll just go ahead and go Dark Age, Middle Age, however you want to phrase it, the Middle Ages. You get to the Renaissance, Reformation, and then you kind of, you move on from there. Look, we're already up there, Age of Exploration. And then you just keep, and they're all European type things. Here's the other thing. Like, I used to always think about this. Like, someone say, well, do you teach about Africa or do you teach about South America? And I was like, oh, yeah, I do. But then this is something that kind of hit me like 4 or 5 years. I do address those places, but it's still usually from a European point of view because it's colonization and things like that. So that was something I had to rework into my curriculum as a teacher. So anyway, the Western history approach, probably the most traditional. And by the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it because there's so much history that's tied to it. And actually, what is starting to happen is I think there's starting to be a break where they're just kind of making it its own thing. I mentioned AP Europe, that's Western history. And then there's usually world history, which kind of gets into that. If you ever look at the way that the history department has their electives divided up, there's like a world, there's Europe, and there's US. There's regional studies. As you can see, it's forming organization in a spatial view instead of a historical perspective. You're just kind of looking at it like you're comparing things in an area and such. That's kind of, to me, kind of connects back to, I'm pointing at it like you can see it, but tracing yourself back up to that place. You might look at the topography and the resources in an area. The Middle East would be a good one because I always, this is something I think of a lot when I'm teaching these type of things. The Middle East incorporates parts of Asia and parts of Africa. I'm always surprised. I will never forget this the day I die. I was teaching a world history class and a high school student actually said something to me and I said, well, Egypt isn't, we'll go to Africa. Let's look at Egypt. And the student was going to they wanted to throw down in a positive way. About Egypt is not in Africa. They were like, it's in Asia, it's in the Middle East. And I was like, no, it's part of Africa. And it was, they couldn't, finally I got a map and they finally understood what I was saying. But which, by the way, this is also a geography type thing. I think it's very important to make sure that your students know where you're talking about. So we were talking about not giving quizzes and just tests. And I did usually give a map quiz before I did any type of section, just to make sure everyone knew kind of where we were talking about, but I digress. Egypt being in that area, it's more connected to the Middle East, oil, the politics and things like that. Africa is a great example because you have sub-Saharan Africa and of course the North Africa. It's more connected up there. I'm looking at Africa there. The next two are, I think, well, actually, to me, the next three are all kind of, in a weird way, connected, but specifically the next two, the international relations approach. Actually, I have on there the C. Brown's Choices program. I'm going to show you that here in our resources video this week. So I'll probably get into this a little more in that, but it kind of focuses on more political relationships and looking at things among people, agencies, institutions. I would not recommend this probably as much for middle school. I think if you were doing something a little more advanced in high school, you could definitely get into it. You could get into some debate type topics. And again, that last one, or I'm sorry, the cross-cultural approach there, that also kind of gets into the themes of political, social, socioeconomic, environmental type history. You can definitely look at that, and how different places have approached global issues. I can't, I'm not, these are also cool, and they may be things that you implement in your classroom. I don't know if you'll ever structure your entire class around these two. And again, I'm going to get into the choices program here in a little bit, so I'm not going to get bogged down. I think, honestly, this one, and this one is also one that you might you'll use, and that's that global history. And it's a more global approach. It's things like, well, when you think about what you have to take some classes that are in Far East, usually Dr. Gordon's classes on Asia and things like that. We're just trying to look at the world as a world, and not just as a European offshoot or something like that. I think definitely this is the trend that's going around. And often the one thing with world history is it says there, it's big. I mean, if you only have a year to cover global history, it gets kind of, gets vast. And one thing that I might actually put it up on the discussion board in a little bit, or I might even just ask you in general when we're meeting on Monday or Friday. No, Thursday, sorry, when we're meeting on Thursday. There's, when you think about the things that you're going to teach, especially in regional type areas, what are you going to focus on? Like, I always thought about this, and I've actually bought books on it. We're in North America. Usually when we do even world history or Western history, we look at things like England, France, Italy. If we're looking in Africa, a lot of times we do Egypt, we do South Africa. What about all those countries that are in between? Africa's huge. Look at Asia. We usually focus on China, Japan, Korea. What about Russia? I forgot about Russia. What about all those like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, places like that? Even Afghanistan. I think even India to some extent. And if going back to North America, think about it. What countries probably most people go into more than any others in this country? It's going to be Mexico and Canada. But there's not a whole lot of Canadian or Mexican history that's highlighted. So, it's one thing you have to do is this. I think if you're going to do a global history approach, you do have to kind of have a game plan, and whether it's centered around economics, some sort of global exchange, political interaction, some way, if you're going to bring things in, that's one way to integrate it. Again, I'm not telling you, chances are you're going to mix these up a little bit and you're going to pull from some, but these are just things to keep in mind. There's different approaches you can take in the classroom. This is posted. I still think we default to this for better or for worse, but I think we're starting to move a little more to a global history approach where we're looking at things on a more global level. And I think these are all ones that you can definitely bring in into your instruction. That is just some of the things that even gets into in world history. And like I say, I would think about this. I can't help myself. I'm thinking about questions and things we talk about in class. Think about, I have a sheet, and I'll share it with you if you want, but I like to ask everyone, what areas would you focus on each continent? Like if you could only pick 2, or if you could only pick 3. Usually I think we put 2. And it's kind of interesting what everyone comes up with, like if you do Africa, what are the places? Well, a lot of times it ends up being South Africa and Egypt. If you're going to do Europe, I usually put 3, but what 3 would you focus on? If you're going to do the Far East, which ones would you do? So, and it's one way to think about it. Think about Australia. Or here's another thing. I mentioned geography. It's a very simple question to ask, but I think students, I think it's good to have a policy on it. Even continents. I've had students I keep saying want to throw down. It's really all positive. But, if you ask someone how many continents there are, most people just say there's 7. Well, if you think about it, there's a lot of answers to this. Some people say there's 6 because of Eurasia. I've heard some people say 5 because Africa was actually connected to Asia and thus Europe into the Suez Canal, where I was just talking about with Egypt. I've heard some people say four because the Americas were actually one continent connected, but the Panama Canal just split them. So it's not a natural split. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I usually went ahead and went seven because that's what most people usually go with. But I have, there's a lot of people that have different schools of thought on that. Also, the Southern Ocean is another one, that gets into some of this global history type things. I think National Geographic still doesn't recognize. I'll have to double check that, the Southern Ocean, but some people say the one, it is an ocean, as far as the 4 versus 5 oceans. So anyway, Atlantic, Indian, Arctic, Pacific, and then some people say down at the bottom, the Southern Ocean's there. I'll have to double check on National Geographic. My gut tells me they're not recognizing it, but I could be wrong. They might be the ones who do recognize it. Those, though, are the approaches. Let me get this out of here. Very interesting. Let's get that off. So what does that all mean for us? One thing, I would definitely look at some of those approaches and, think about it a little bit. Some things that I've actually done also as far as world history. World history is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of interesting people that are in it. I just wanted to show you some of the exercises I've done. I post tons of this stuff up on resources if you want to check it out. But, if you're in ed tech, one thing I've done before, I've done farce books. I used to make ed tech actually do these, but I think there's so much actual tech because of COVID that we need to do. I don't think we're going to get to do this. But if you type in farce book, not Facebook, farce book, there are templates. I used to make students do research projects and make like a mock Facebook page. And it was a lot of fun. I told them they could be funny to an extent. So, this was Pope Urban II, who was, he called for the First Crusade. His networks were the papacy, Vespers, the Notre Dame tailgate club, ha ha ha. His political views, they would have to do a little bio, have to do quotes, what their favorite quotes are, activities. There were preaching, traveling, starting holy wars. His favorite books, the Bible, Travel's Guide to the Holy Land. Favorite movies were Passion of the Christ and Indiana Jones. You can tell how old this is. That movie was from a while ago. This is just something, you can get creative. They had to make connections, and I had a rubric with this. I would recommend always having a rubric for any projects like this, even if it's a holistic, just base type scoring type thing. But, I have Urban Meyer there because they shared a name. So that would be, one activity you could do. We talked about heroes versus villains. This is actually a magazine from the National Council of Social Studies that I posted, but it kind of gets into, a debate that you can do for the heroes versus villains. They used Alexander the Great, who was a good example because the way he's portrayed in Western history is a little different than maybe how he's portrayed in India, because he's viewed more as a conqueror, and, the areas of Iran and stuff like that, Persia. And by the way, you're welcome to download any of these, or if you have any questions on that. Another thing that I would always say, and I think I've said this before, but again, I can't help myself. Your language arts teacher is a really good source. I used to love to have my students read Animal Farm. I used to do it when I was in a private school for a while in 8th grade. We actually read Animal Farm and they loved it. They did it in language arts class, and then I did the Russian history type aspect to it. And, they were doing a lot of allegories and stuff. You cannot beat different things as far as, you can't beat things like historical fiction novels and all, as far as just making students sometimes make connections and such. Animal Farm is a natural with that, and allegories, but there's other ones. All's Quiet on the Western Front is one. If they're a little more advanced in high school, you get a German perspective instead of just the Western side or the Allied side. So, my son is actually, this is U.S. history, but he's reading My Brother Sam is Dead, which kind of gets into a loyalist side in the American Revolution. So don't underestimate the power of literature. And if you can get a language arts teacher that makes a lot of those connections, it's great. A lot of schools are really good at like intermixing the Holocaust. Maybe they're reading something and they're doing something in language arts. Heck, when I taught the Renaissance, I worked with an art teacher. She did some Renaissance type drawings and stuff with the class. And then we actually went down to the National Gallery of Art one year when I was teaching it. That we had a blast with that. So don't ever forget the integrated curriculums and things like that. But again, those are just some ideas that I had done with exercises I thought I'd throw out. And of course, we talked about primary source stuff last week, and you're going to look at some in the coming weeks. But, even World War I posters, this is a lesson plan that I had used. And again, I pulled parts out. I didn't do the whole thing, but we analyzed World War I posters and kind of tried to look from points of view and such. But there you go. It's all on there if you want to check it out. Oh, look, it even had a rubric if you wanted. So that's that. Okay, now, as we're moving on here, one other thing that I would like you to know is that you do have an assignment this week. It is the World History Inquiry-Based Analysis assignment, or as I call it, the WHIBAA assignment. I just call it the World History assignment. This is something, again, I don't hate to keep saying this. If we were meeting like week to week, I'm not talking on Zoom, I'm talking like in a classroom. We would do some of this in there, but I want to make sure that you're thinking about these things as you're planning and such. If you click this, you'll get this. I think I already pulled it up. Actually, I did. All right. Oh, nope. Yes. Okay. You're going to get this. But before you do that, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit. You should have something that looks like this. That was one of our textbooks. We're going to do a few things with this and jump back and forth between these textbooks a little bit so you can look at things. This was the textbook that I was kind of excited to use. This was the first year I was going to use it. And first year I am using it. And because I think it's good for you all to see actual lesson plans, and just to see some inquiry-based things in documents. As you see, there's a whole bunch of different ancient world type ones. I picked the ancient world over the little more modern because I know if you're teaching in Maryland or West Virginia in 7th and 6th in Maryland, you're going to do a little bit of ancient history. And that's something I know some people who went out in the field said they didn't feel like they had some materials on. So I wanted to make sure you at least had maybe some sample lesson plans. But as you look, there's obviously some readings, there's some lessons in there. You're going to start, going through them. There's the lesson, the hooks. Let me go back. Boom, 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 boom. And, it has its materials. And it's just got a base level lesson plan here. It's got your hooks, your questions, your hypothesis. The hypothesis is connected to the documents and such. What I want you to do, I'm just going to dig that out, and I'm going to pull this back up, is I just want you to answer these questions.